If you stand perfectly still in the suburbs at 7:15 a.m. on a Saturday, you can hear the distinct, terrifying sound of property values being weaponized. It's a soft, scratch sound, the sound of a ballpoint pen hitting a violation pad. I was standing in my driveway, wearing flannel pajama pants and a t-shirt that said, "I paused my game to be here," holding a bright yellow Stanley tape measure. Opposite me, looking like a predator that had just cornered a particularly slow gazelle, was Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins is the president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association. She is a woman who treats the HOA bylaws not as a set of guidelines for communal living, but as a holy text that she alone can interpret. She was wearing her signature look, a floral blouse that probably cost more than my first car, khaki capris, and a visor that seemed to be fused to her skull. "I don't see the issue, Brenda," I said, retracting the tape measure with a loud snap that made her flinch. "The cans are behind the bush. The bush is green. The cans are black. Physics does the rest. You can't see them." Brenda Higgins adjusted her glasses. She didn't look at me. She looked past me, at the offending object. A 96-gallon generic waste receptacle. "Mark," she said, her voice dripping with that faux sweetness that Southern women use right before they ruin your life. "It isn't about physics. It is about compliance. Article 4, Section 2 of the Oak Haven Covenant states clearly, refuse containers must be wholly concealed from street view within a permanent structure or garage. Your azalea bush, while lovely, is deciduous. It's summertime, Brenda. It has leaves. It is currently wholly concealing the cans." She smirked. It was a terrifying expression, like a shark realizing the seal is injured. She held up her phone. She tapped the screen and turned it toward me. "This photo was taken yesterday at 2:14 p.m., from the sidewalk." I squinted. It was a picture of my bush. But there, peeking through a gap in the leaves, no larger than a quarter, was a sliver of black plastic. Specifically, the handle of the recycling bin. "You zoomed in," I accused. "That is a 10x zoom. You would need bionic eyes to see that from the street." "The camera lens merely replicates the potential gaze of a passerby," she said, tucking the phone away. "If I can photograph it, it is not concealed. You have been warned twice, Mark. This is a citation." She handed me a pink slip. I didn't even have to look at it to know the damage. $150? I choked out, looking at the number. "For a handle? Brenda, I could buy a new handle for $5. I could paint the handle green. I could cover the handle in camouflage tape." "Modifying the container is a violation of the waste management contract," she said smoothly, already turning away to scan the horizon for unauthorized bird feeders. "You have 7 days to pay the fine and rectify the storage solution, or the fines will accrue daily. Have a blessed day." I watched her walk away. Her gait was rhythmic, purposeful. Left, right, judge, judge. I stood there for a long time. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over my driveway, but all I felt was the cold shadow of injustice. I looked at my trash cans. They looked innocent enough. They were just vessels for pizza boxes and Amazon packaging. They didn't ask to be the center of a legal battle. I dragged them into my main garage, squeezing them between my wife's SUV and my workbench. It was tight. I had to suck in my gut to get past them to reach the door. "This is ridiculous," I muttered to myself. My wife, Sarah, was in the kitchen making coffee when I stormed in, waving the pink slip like a flag of war. "She got you?" Sarah asked, not looking up from the French press. "She zoomed in, Sarah. She used a digital zoom. It's practically entrapment. It's surveillance state tactics." "Just pay it, Mark. It's Mrs. Higgins. You know she measures the grass with a ruler, I am not paying $150 because a leaf blew in the wrong direction, I said, slapping the citation onto the granite island. She wants a structure? She wants wholly concealed within a permanent structure? Fine. Mark, Sarah said, her tone warning. Do not start a war with the HOA. We have to live here. I'm not starting a war, I said, grabbing a mug. I'm ending one. She cited the specific rule, Article 4, Section 2. I'm going to follow that rule so hard her head spins. I spent the rest of the day fuming. Every time I went into the garage, I had to shimmy past the trash cans. They smelled faintly of old banana peels. It was undignified. I am a 35-year-old man. I work in logistics. I solve problems for a living. And I was being defeated by a woman whose primary hobby was policing beige paint swatches. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, the number 150 dancing in my head. It wasn't the money. Okay, it was a little bit about the money, but mostly it was the principle, the arrogance of it, the idea that my property wasn't really mine, but merely a leased territory in the kingdom of Higgins. I got up at 2:00 a.m. I went downstairs to my office and opened my laptop. I didn't go to porn sites or gaming forums. I went to the Oak Haven Estates resident portal. I downloaded the PDF, Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CC&Rs. 412 pages. I cracked my knuckles. Okay, Brenda, I whispered to the glowing screen. Let's see what you actually wrote. I read. I drank coffee. I read more. I highlighted sections. I cross-referenced state property laws. By 4:00 a.m., my eyes were bleeding, but I had found nothing. The bylaws were ironclad. Structures had to be approved. Structures had to match the house. Structures couldn't be prefab sheds. But then, at 5:30 a.m., just as the birds were starting to chirp the song of the morning, I found it. Article 9. Detached. Outbuildings and garages. Most of the text was about limiting size. No guest houses larger than 800 square feet. No two-story sheds. But I was looking for the lower limit. I was looking for the minimums. Paragraph C. All detached garages must share the same architectural style, siding, and roofing materials as the primary residence. Paragraph D. All detached garages must be erected on a permanent concrete foundation. Paragraph E. All detached garages must be serviced by a paved driveway extension. I scanned down. I searched for minimum square footage. I searched for door size. I searched for vehicle capacity. Nothing. There was absolutely zero language defining what a garage had to hold. It just said it had to be a permanent structure designed for storage. A slow, maniacal grin spread across my face. I looked like the Grinch realizing he could steal Christmas. But instead of stealing gifts, I was going to steal Mrs. Higgins's sanity. She wanted my trash cans in a garage? I would build them a garage. A literal, miniature, fully to-code garage. I printed the page. I circled the lack of restrictions with a red Sharpie. I walked to the window and looked out at the spot on the side of my driveway where the azalea bush stood. Goodbye, bush, I whispered. Hello, Trash Mahal. The next morning, I didn't just need coffee. I needed a civil engineer. Fortunately, I knew one. Sam has been my best friend since college. He designs bridges. He is a man of science, logic, and beer. I met him at the Rusty Anchor at noon on a Sunday. I laid the bylaws and my crude napkin sketches on the sticky table between us. Let me get this straight, Sam said, wiping foam from his mustache. You want to build a garage, a detached, fully framed brick veneer garage. Correct, I said. But the dimensions you have listed here. He squinted at my drawing. Mark, This says 4 feet wide by 5 feet deep. Correct. And 5 feet tall. Actually, let's make it 6 feet at the peak. I want a vaulted ceiling. Sam put his beer down slowly. He looked at me with genuine concern. Is this a mental breakdown? Should I call Sarah? It's malicious compliance, Sam. Read Article 9. Sam picked up the highlighted pages. He read them. He read them again. The engineer in him took over. He started tapping his finger on the table. Huh, he grunted. They forgot the minimums. Rookie mistake. Usually you mandate a 10 by 12 minimum for permit requirements. But this is wide open. Can we do it? I asked, leaning in. Can we design something that is technically, legally, and structurally a garage, but is the size of a doghouse? Sam pulled a pen from his pocket. He flipped my napkin over. We can do better than that. If you want to beat the ACC, Architectural Control Committee, it can't just look like a shed. It has to be a masterpiece of miniature engineering. It needs a slab. It needs framing studs. We'll have to rip 2x4s down or just use full ones and over-engineer the hell out of it. You'll need a header for the door. I want a real garage door, I said. Sectional. On tracks. Sam laughed. It was a deep belly laugh. You want a sectional garage door that's, what, 3 feet wide? 36 inches exactly, to fit 2 standard bins side by side with 2 inches of clearance. Mark, nobody manufactures that. Then we build it, I said. I have the budget, I have the rage, I have the power tools. We spent the next 3 hours drafting Project Oscar. It was beautiful. We designed a poured concrete slab foundation with rebar reinforcement, overkill. We designed 16-inch on-center framing, standard. We matched the pitch of my house's roof, 812 pitch. We included details that were legally necessary but hilariously diminutive. A tiny side entry door for human access, which would require crawling. A functional gutter system that would channel rain into a thimble-sized downspout. The pièce de résistance was the materials list. Siding. Hardy plank lap. Siding. Color match. Cobblestone, same as my house. Trim. Arctic white PVC, same as my house. Roofing. Architectural asphalt shingles. Weathered wood, same as my house. Foundation, 3,000 psi concrete. You realize, Sam said as we finalized the CAD drawing on his laptop, that this is going to cost you about $2 grand, maybe $3. The fine was $150. It's an investment, Sam, an investment in my soul. Monday morning, I walked into the HOA management office. The receptionist, a nice girl named Kelly who looked like she hated her job, looked up. Hi, I'm here to submit an architectural modification request, I said, slamming a thick folder onto the counter. Kelly blinked. Oh, okay. For a detached garage, I said. She opened the folder. She saw the professional blueprints. She saw the site survey. She saw the material samples I had taped to cardstock. It looks small, she noted, looking at the scale. It's a compact design, I said. Efficient, minimalist. Okay, the committee meets Thursday. You'll hear back by Friday. The waiting game began. I was nervous. If Mrs. Higgins was on the architectural committee, I was dead. But I had done my recon. Mrs. Higgins was the president, but the ACC was run by Mr. Henderson, a retired architect who was legally blind in one eye and hated Higgins because she once fined him for having a non-conforming bird bath. Friday came. An email pinged on my phone. Subject: ACC request. Approved. Comments: project meets all material and setback requirements. Proceed with construction. Please ensure construction debris is contained. I let out a scream of victory that frightened my dog. They hadn't looked closely at the scale. Or maybe Henderson just didn't care. They saw matching materials and concrete foundation and rubber stamped it. I had the permit. I had the green light. Now I just needed a builder who wouldn't ask. Too many questions. Enter Big Mike. Big Mike is a general contractor who usually builds decks and remodels basements. He's a man the size of a vending machine, with hands like baseball mitts. I've used him before to fix a fence. I called him up. "Mike, I got a job. New construction. Detached garage." "Sounds good, boss," Mike rumbled over the phone. "One car or two?" 0.5, I said. "Say what?" "Just come over, Mike. You have to see the plans." When Mike arrived the next day, he stood in my driveway, looking at the flags I had planted in the ground to mark the corners. The square was tiny. It looked like I was burying a large hamster. "So," Mike said, scratching his beard, "you want a garage? Here." "Yes." "And the plans say—" He consulted the clipboard I gave him. 48 inches by 60 inches. "Yes." "Boss," Mike said, lowering his sunglasses. "Is this for a riding mower? Because a riding mower won't fit." "It's for the trash cans, Mike." Mike stared at me. He stared at the trash cans. He stared at the flags. Then, a slow realization dawned on him. He looked toward Mrs. Higgins' house across the street. He knew the lore. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the lore. Is this because of the witch?" Mike whispered. "She fined me for the handle showing." Mike's face went through a journey of emotions: confusion, disbelief, understanding, and finally pure, unadulterated joy. He slapped his knee. "I love it. I freaking love it. I'll do it for cost of labor and materials. No markup. I just want to be part of history." "You're a good man, Mike." "We gonna pour a real slab?" "The code requires it." "I'll get the mini excavator," Mike said, cracking his knuckles. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right. This thing is going to be strong enough to survive a nuclear blast. The cockroaches and your trash cans will be the only things left." We shook hands. The pact was sealed. The next day, the chaos began. And by chaos, I mean the sweet, sweet sound of construction noise at 8:01 a.m., 1 minute after the noise ordinance allowed. Mike showed up with a truck, a mixer, and 2 guys who looked very confused. They started digging. They framed up the tiny foundation. By noon, the neighbors were watching. People walking dogs were stopping. They were pointing. "What's he building?" I heard old Mr. Peterson ask. "A bunker?" "Too small," his wife said. "Maybe a sauna?" "In the driveway?" I stood on my porch, sipping coffee, watching the theater. But I knew who I was really waiting for. At 12:30 p.m., the inevitable happened. The sliding glass door across the street opened. Mrs. Higgins emerged. She had the clipboard. She had the phone. She was coming. "Here we go," I muttered. She marched across the street, ignoring the traffic. She walked right up to Big Mike, who was currently smoothing out wet concrete with a tiny trowel. "Excuse me," she barked. "Stop this work immediately!" Mike stood up. He towered over her. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "This is unauthorized construction!" she shrieked. "You are pouring concrete. This is a permanent structure. You cannot just build sheds in the front yard." I stepped off the porch. "Afternoon, Brenda." She whirled on me. "Mark, what is this monstrosity? You are violating at least 5 bylaws. No sheds in the front setback. No unapproved structures." "It's not a shed, Brenda," I said calmly. "It's a detached garage, and it's not unapproved." I pulled the laminated permit out of my back pocket. I held it up. The sun caught the lamination, making it shine like a shield of righteousness. ACC approved as of last Friday. Meets all setback requirements. It's 3 feet from the property line, which is the code for accessory structures under 100 square feet. And as you can see, we are pouring a foundation as per Article 9, Paragraph D. She snatched the paper from my hand. Her eyes scanned it frantically. She was looking for a flaw. A date error. A typo. Anything. This can't be right, she stammered. A garage? For what? Refuse containers, I said, to ensure they are wholly concealed from street view within a permanent structure, as per your citation. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at the wet concrete. She looked at the tiny footprint. She realized that she had pushed a man too far, and that man had responded by throwing money into a hole in the ground just to spite her. This is ridiculous, she hissed. It's an eyesore. I will have the board revoke this. You can try, I said. But strictly speaking, Brenda, once construction has commenced under an approved permit, you'd need a court order to stop it. And I don't think a judge cares about a 4x5 garage. She threw the paper back at me. We'll see about this, she threatened, turning on her heel. I'm calling the city. You need a building permit for a garage. Already got it, I called after her. It's taped to the front door. She didn't look back. Mike wiped sweat from his forehead. Man, she is intense. She creates her own weather system. She's going to call the cops, I predicted. Or the city inspector. Let her, Mike grinned. My concrete is perfect. Let's get this framed up. By day 3, the structure had bones. Seeing a full-sized crew working on a miniature building is inherently funny. It looked like a perspective trick. Mike's guys, Tony and Sal, were struggling. Boss, Tony yelled, holding a 2x4. I can't fit the nail gun in here. The studs are too close. Use a hammer, Tony, like the pioneers, Mike yelled back. I was supervising from a lawn chair, drinking iced tea. The frame was up. It looked exactly like my house, just shrunken. A perfect gable roof. But the real challenge was the door. I had to custom order the garage door panels. I couldn't buy a garage door that small, obviously. I had gone to a custom millwork shop in town. The guy there, old ass, Man Miller, no relation to the cop who would show up later, had looked at my drawings for 20 minutes in silence. You want me to make paneling that looks like a steel garage door, but out of wood and hinged so it rolls up? Yes. And you want windows in the top panel? Frosted glass, yes. Son, Miller had said, I charge $80 an hour. I'll pay it. Now Big Mike was installing the tracks. We had to use drawer slides, heavy-duty industrial drawer slides meant for tool chests, because actual garage door tracks were too big. This is genius, Mike muttered, screwing the tracks into the tiny header. It's gonna glide like butter. The confusion really ramped up when the siding delivery truck arrived. The driver hopped out, looking at his manifest. I got 6 planks of hardy board, he asked, looking at my massive house. Is this a repair job? New construction, I said, pointing to the wooden skeleton in the driveway. The driver looked at the skeleton. He looked at me. Is that for a generator? Nope. Well house? Nope. Playhouse for the kids? It's for trash. The driver just shook his head, signed the paper, and dropped the planks. Rich people are weird, I heard him mumble as he walked away. I'm not rich, strictly speaking, but in that moment, with my custom trash house, I felt like Elon Musk, if Elon Musk invested in pettiness instead of rockets. The real comedy came when we had to do the roofing. Tony had to climb onto the roof. The roof was 5 feet off the ground. When Tony stood on it, he looked like Godzilla stomping on a village. "Is this gonna hold me?" Tony asked, wobbling. "It's 16 on center, Tony," Mike yelled. "It could hold a truck, just don't bounce." Tony laid the shingles. He had to cut each standard shingle into 3 pieces to make the scale look right. If we used full-sized shingles, it would look like a shed. We wanted the optical illusion of a house. "Detailed work," Tony grumbled. "I usually just slap these on." "Art takes time, Tony," I encouraged him. While they were working, a white pickup truck pulled up. It had the city seal on the door. Building inspector. Mrs. Higgins had made good on her threat. The inspector, a guy named Dave, good name, walked up the driveway with a clipboard. He looked weary. He looked like a man who spent his day arguing about deck railing heights. "Permit check," Dave said. I pointed to the window of my actual house where the city permit was displayed. Dave walked over, squinted at it, then walked back to the tiny garage. He walked around it. He kicked the foundation. He looked at the framing. "Okay," Dave said. "Technically, it's an accessory structure. Under 200 square feet, usually doesn't need a permit, but since you pulled one for a detached garage, I have to inspect it as a garage." "Hit me," I said. "Where's the electrical?" "Rough-in is happening tomorrow," I said. "I have a licensed electrician coming." "You're putting power to this?" Dave raised an eyebrow. "I need an opener," I said. "And lighting, security lighting." Dave chewed his lip. "Right, well, framing looks sturdy. Overkill, actually. You have hurricane ties on the rafters?" "Yes, sir," Mike chimed in. "Simpson strong ties, everywhere." Dave sighed. "All right, call me for the electrical inspection. I honestly don't know how to code this. It's too small to be a habitable space, so I don't need to check for egress windows. It's fine. It's weird, but it's fine." He signed a card and stuck it to the tiny plywood wall. "What's it for, if you don't mind me asking?" Dave asked as he turned to leave. "Trash cans," I said. Dave stopped. He looked at the structure. He looked at Mrs. Higgins' house across the street. A slow smile spread across his face. "Mrs. Higgins?" he asked. "Mrs. Higgins," I confirmed. "She called me 3 times today," Dave said. "She said you were building a commercial facility. She said you were running a business." "Just the business of waste disposal, Dave." "You know," the inspector said, opening his truck door. "I inspected her deck last year. She made me measure the spacing between the balusters with a micrometer. Not a tape measure. A micrometer." He looked back at my tiny garage with newfound respect. "Make sure you use GFCI outlets for the exterior power." "Will do, Dave." He drove off. I felt invincible. But the contractor interactions weren't over. I needed the interior finished. I hired a drywall guy. The drywall guy, a chain smoker named Rick, showed up with stilts. He looked at the garage. He looked at his stilts. He put the stilts back in the truck. "I gotta kneel for this whole job, don't I?" Rick rasped. "Afraid so, Rick. I charge extra for knee pads." "Put it on the bill." Rick drywalling the interior of a 4x5 box was like watching a ship in a bottle being built, if the shipbuilder was swearing constantly. "I can't turn around in here." Thump. "Ow! My elbow." "Looking good, Rick," I called from the driveway. "It echoes in here," Rick yelled back. "Why does a trash can need smooth finish walls?" "Because texture traps dirt, Rick. We need a level 5 finish." "You're crazy, man, seriously crazy." But he did it. He taped and mudded the seams. It was smooth as glass. The final contractor hurdle was the painter. I didn't hire a painter. I decided to do it myself to save... Well, I wasn't saving money at this point, but I wanted the therapeutic value. I bought the paint. Sherwin-Williams agreeable gray for the interior. Cobblestone for the exterior. I was painting the trim on the tiny door, a door I had custom built from plywood and molding to look like a shaker-style entry door, when a delivery van pulled up. It was the flooring. Yes, flooring. I wasn't going to have my trash cans sitting on bare concrete like animals. Concrete absorbs smells. I had ordered black and white checkered vinyl tiles, peel and stick, but high quality. Like a 1950s diner or a high-end racing garage. I was laying the tiles, hunched over like a gargoyle inside the structure, when I heard a voice. "What in God's name are you doing?" It was Sarah, my wife. She had been away on a business trip for 3 days. She knew I was building something, but she hadn't seen the evolution. I backed out of the garage on my hands and knees. "Hey, honey. Welcome home." She stared at the structure. It was nearly done. It looked adorable. It looked like our house had a baby. Does it have gutters?" she asked, pointing to the tiny aluminum channels Mike had bent by hand. "Drainage is important, Sarah." She walked up to it. She looked inside at the checkered floor and the freshly painted gray walls. "Mark," she said, "this is nicer than our actual garage." "The actual garage is cluttered," I defended. "This is purpose-built." She put her hand on her forehead. She was trying to be mad. I could see the budget calculations running through her eyes. But then she looked across the street. Mrs. Higgins was in her window, holding binoculars. Actual binoculars. Sarah looked at Higgins. She looked at the tiny garage. She looked at me, covered in drywall dust and paint. "Does the door work?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "Sparky comes tomorrow to wire the motor. And the accessories." "Accessories?" "I'm putting in a sound system." Sarah stared at me for a long 10 seconds. Then she let out a sigh that was 50% exhaustion and 50% admiration. "If you get arrested, I'm not bailing you out," she said. But she was smiling. "Make sure the trim matches the shutters, Mark. If we're doing this, it has to be perfect." Way ahead of you. The stage was set. The structure was sound. The city was on board, mostly. The wife was compliant. Now we just needed the spark. And the police interaction I knew was coming. Because Mrs. Higgins wasn't done. She had one more card to play. The noise complaint. The next morning, a van arrived that looked like it was held together by duct tape and prayers. On the side, in peeling vinyl letters, it said, "Sparky's Electric. If we can't fix it, it's probably haunted." Sparky himself hopped out. He was about 25, wearing a tool belt that pulled his pants down dangerously low, and he was chewing gum with aggressive enthusiasm. "Yo," Sparky said, surveying the scene. "Big Mike told me about this. I thought he was high. But there it is." "There it is," I confirmed. "The Trash Mahal." Sparky walked up to the structure. He didn't measure it. He just patted the roof like it was a good dog. "Cute. So you want power? For what? A light bulb?" "I need a garage door opener," I said. Sparky stopped chewing. "Bro, the smallest genie opener is like 2 feet long. The rail is 7 feet. You don't have the headspace." "I know," I said, pulling up a schematic on my phone. "That's why we aren't using a garage door opener. We're using a heavy-duty linear actuator, like they use on hospital beds or solar panels. I bought a 12-volt actuator with an 18-inch stroke. We mount it vertically, attach it to the bottom panel, and it pushes the door up the track." Sparky looked at me. He looked at the phone. He looked at the tiny garage. "That is needlessly complicated," he said, a grin spreading across his face. I love it. Let's wire it up. We spent the morning running a conduit from the main house. We had to trench through the lawn, which I knew Mrs. Higgins was watching from her command post, her kitchen window. We ran a dedicated 20-amp circuit. Why 20 amps? Because I didn't just want a door opener, I wanted options. We were deep in the weeds of wiring the control board, an Arduino unit I had programmed to handle the remote signal, when a shadow fell over us. I looked up. It wasn't Mrs. Higgins. It was a police cruiser, 2 of them, actually. Mrs. Higgins had escalated from city code enforcement to law enforcement. A large officer stepped out of the first car. He adjusted his belt. He looked tired. His name tag read Miller. "Gentlemen," Officer Miller said, walking up the driveway. "Afternoon, officer," I said, standing up and wiping wire insulation off my shirt. Sparky stayed on the ground, soldering a connection. "Can I help you?" "We received a call," Miller said, consulting a small notebook. "Regarding, well, the dispatcher said unpermitted commercial industrial activity and hazardous noise levels involving high-voltage machinery." Sparky snorted. "I'm soldering a 12-volt circuit, officer. My vape pen has higher voltage." Miller looked at the tiny garage. He looked at the trench. He looked at the conduit. "Is this a doghouse?" Miller asked. "It's a garage," I corrected, "for trash cans." Miller blinked. He was a man who had probably seen domestic disputes, burglaries, and traffic accidents, but he had likely never seen a man spend $3,000 to house garbage. "Trash cans," he repeated. "The HOA fined me for them being visible," I explained. "They required a permanent structure. This is that structure." Miller looked across the street. He saw the curtain twitch in the Higgins residence. He sighed, a long, heavy exhale that seemed to deflate his tactical vest. "Mrs. Higgins?" "Mrs. Higgins," I confirmed. "She called 911, Miller said. "Not the non-emergency line, 911. She said you were building a server farm that was going to brown out the neighborhood grid." "I'm installing a motion sensor LED light and a door motor, officer. Total draw is maybe 2 amps. Miller walked over to the structure. He peered inside. He saw the black and white checkered floor. He saw the smooth drywall. Is that a chandelier?" he asked, pointing to the small fixture I had hung from the center rafter. "It's a mini pendant," I said, modest. "Crystal accents. Got it at Home Depot." Miller started to chuckle. The chuckle turned into a laugh. The laugh turned into a wheeze. He leaned against his cruiser, wiping his eyes. "Okay," he said, catching his breath. "Okay. This is civil. This is not criminal. There is no noise violation. There is no commercial activity unless you're charging the raccoons rent." "No rent, sir. Just waste management." "I'm gonna clear the call," Miller said. "But I gotta ask, can I take a picture? The guys at the precinct aren't gonna believe this." "Be my guest." Miller snapped a photo. "Good luck, sir. And, maybe keep the voltage down? Don't want to melt the plastic." "Will do." As Miller drove away, I saw Mrs. Higgins step out onto her porch. She looked furious. The police had come, they had seen, and they had laughed. Her weaponization of the state had failed. Sparky stood up, brushing dirt off his knees. "You know, if you really want to tick her off, we should make it louder." "I don't want noise complaints," I said. "Not noise," Sparky said, tapping his temple. "Theater. You have a 20-amp circuit. You have an Arduino board. We could hook up a sound system. You know, for safety alerts when the door opens." I looked at Sparky. I looked at the empty space inside the garage walls where we hadn't closed up the drywall yet. "Sparky," I said, "do you know how to wire a Bluetooth receiver to a PA horn?" "Do I? Is the Pope Catholic? I've got a spare Bose outdoor speaker in my van. We can mount it in the rafters, hidden behind the fascia." "Do it," I commanded. "And the lighting," Sparky added, his eyes manic now. "Just a pendant light? Boring. You need strip lights, LEDs along the floor, runway lights." "Runway lights," I whispered. "Yes." We spent the rest of the afternoon turning the garage into a disco. We installed a waterproof LED strip along the baseboards. We mounted the speaker hidden in the eaves. We wired it all to the central controller. When I hit the remote button, the sequence was programmed. Interior lights fade up. 3 seconds. Audio cue triggers. Linear actuator engages, lifting the door. "It works!" Sparky yelled as the tiny door juddered, then slid up the track smoothly. It revealed the empty interior, glowing with a soft, cool white light. "It's beautiful," I said, "but it's missing something." I looked at the checkered floor. It was classy, but it wasn't regal. "What?" Sparky asked. "The approach," I said. "The cans. They just roll out onto the concrete driveway. It's pedestrian." I looked at my wife's sewing room window. An idea, terrible and wonderful, formed in my mind. "I need a mechanism," I said. "Something that deploys. A surface." "Like a ramp?" "No," I said. "Like a carpet." The red carpet protocol was technically the hardest part of the build. Building a garage is standard construction. Making an automated tongue that sticks out of a building is robotics. I went to the fabric store. I bought 6 yards of premium red velvet. The lady at the counter asked what I was making. "A robe for a king?" she guessed. "Something like that," I said. I also bought a heavy-duty window shade roller mechanism and 2 spring-loaded drawer slides. The concept was this. The carpet would be rolled up on a dowel inside the garage, just inside the threshold. When the door opened, a secondary arm, which I fabricated out of an old windshield wiper linkage, would hook onto the hem of the carpet and pull it outward as the door rose. Well, that was the theory. In practice, it jammed. A lot. "It keeps bunching up!" I yelled, lying on my stomach on the driveway, half of my body inside the tiny garage. It was Tuesday night. Trash day was tomorrow morning. We were in crunch time. "You need a weighted hem," Sarah said. She had come out to bring me a sandwich and had stayed to critique my engineering. "The velvet is too light. It catches the wind." "Weighted 'em," I muttered. "Genius." I ran to my fishing tackle box. I grabbed a handful of lead sinkers. Sarah sewed them into the hem of the velvet. We re-rigged the system. Test 47. I hit the button. Whirr! The door rose. Click. The wiper arm engaged. Swish. The red velvet unrolled, sliding out onto the driveway, creating a 4-foot-long path of luxury leading away from the structure. "Yes!" I screamed. "It works!" "It looks ridiculous," Sarah said, beaming. "I love it." Now, the aesthetics. I couldn't just leave the garage sitting on the asphalt. It needed landscaping. I went to the garden center. I bought boxwoods. But not normal boxwoods. Dwarf boxwoods. Bonsai-sized. I planted them on either side of the tiny garage door. I laid down miniature white river rocks. I even installed 2 solar-powered path lights that were meant for fairy gardens. I stood back. It was perfect. It matched our house exactly, down to the shingles and the siding color. But it was 1/10 the size. It sat there, dignified, silent, waiting for its purpose. Mrs. Higgins had been quiet for 2 days. Too quiet. I knew she was plotting. I knew she was probably reading the Geneva Convention to see if my garage violated international treaties. But I was ready. The final touch was the audio. I connected my phone to the hidden Bluetooth receiver. I opened Spotify. I created a playlist titled Trash Day. I needed the perfect song. Eye of the Tiger? Too cliché. The Imperial March? Too villainous. Pomp and Circumstance? Maybe. Then I found it. The only piece of music grand enough for 2 plastic bins filled with coffee grounds and diapers. Also, Sprach Zarathustra. The theme from 2001. A Space Odyssey. I tested the timing. The opening rumble of the drums, the brass fanfare. It peaked exactly at the moment the door would be fully open. "Mark," Sarah called from the porch. "Come to bed. You have a big day tomorrow." "I can't sleep, Sarah. It's Christmas Eve for petty people." I finally went to bed, but I tossed and turned. I dreamed of Mrs. Higgins swimming in a sea of red tape. Wednesday morning, 6:30 a.m. The sun was just cresting over the oak trees. The air was crisp. The neighborhood was silent. I got up, showered, and dressed. I didn't put on work clothes. I put on my best suit, a navy blue number I usually saved for weddings and funerals. "You're wearing a tie?" Sarah asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Respect the occasion," I said. I went downstairs. I brewed coffee. I walked out the front door. The stage was set. The Trash Mahal gleamed in the morning light. The dew sparkled on the tiny dwarf boxwoods. I looked across the street. The blinds in the Higgins house were open. She was there, watching. I looked down the street. I could hear the rumble, the garbage truck. It was 3 blocks away. I texted the neighborhood group chat, a chat that had been formed specifically to exclude Mrs. Higgins after she used the official one to complain about the color of someone's mulch. Me. It's time. 7:00 a.m. Bring coffee. Doors opened. It was like a scene from a movie. Neighbors spilled out onto their porches. Sam the engineer was there, holding a mug. Big Mike had actually driven over in his truck and was parked at the curb, eating a donut. Sparky was leaning against a tree, vaping. They knew. They all knew. The garbage truck turned the corner. The garbage truck was a massive, rumbling beast. It hissed and squeaked as it stopped at the Miller residence 2 doors down. The sanitation workers, 2 guys I knew casually as the guys who take my crap away, hopped off the back. Let's call them Dave, yes, another Dave, and Steve. They emptied the Miller's bins. They hopped back on. The truck lurched forward. It stopped in front of my house. Usually my bins were at the curb. Today, the curb was empty. Dave hopped off. He looked at the empty curb. He looked at me. I was standing at the top of the driveway, in a full suit, holding a coffee mug, standing next to a remote control that looked like it belonged to a drone strike. "Morning, Mark," Dave yelled over the idle of the truck. "Forget to put 'em out?" "Not at all, Dave," I yelled back. "I just stored them according to HOA regulations." "What? Watch this." I raised the remote. I pointed it at the tiny garage. I made eye contact with Mrs. Higgins across the street. She was pressed against the glass like a gecko. I pressed the button. Boom. 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 The hidden subwoofer, which Sparky had insisted on adding at the last minute, kicked in. The opening timpanis of Also Sprach Zarathustra vibrated through the morning air. It wasn't deafening, but it was audible. It was profound. Dave and Steve froze. The neighbors leaned in. "Whirr! The interior lights of the garage faded up, casting a heavenly glow through the frosted windows of the tiny door. Da-da! The trumpets hit. The tiny garage door began to rise. And then, the carpet. The red velvet tongue rolled out, uncurling with a soft swish over the pavement. It extended 4 feet, perfectly flat thanks to the fishing weights. The door hit the top of the track. The music swelled to its crescendo. Bum, 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 bum. There, sitting in the center of the structure, bathed in the cool glow of LED strip lights, resting on a black and white checkered floor, were the 2 trash cans. They looked majestic. They looked important. I walked down the driveway. I walked with the gravitas of a diplomat. I stepped onto the red carpet, carefully. I bowed to the cans. I grabbed the handle of the trash bin. I wheeled it down the velvet path. I transitioned to the driveway and rolled it to the stunned sanitation workers. I went back. I grabbed the recycling bin. I wheeled it out. I stood next to Dave and Steve. They were staring at the garage. The door was still open. The music was tapering off. The red carpet lay there like a challenge to God. "That," Steve said, removing his glove to wipe a tear from his eye, "that is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." "Mrs. Higgins said they had to be in a permanent structure," I said loud enough for the acoustics to carry across the street. "So here we are." Big Mike started a slow clap. Sam joined in. The neighbors on their porches started clapping. Even Officer Miller, who I hadn't noticed parked down the street, flashed his cruiser lights once in solidarity. Dave shook his head, laughing. "Man, I feel bad taking this trash. It lives better than I do." "Treat them with respect, gentlemen," I said. "They are aristocrats now." They loaded the trash into the hopper. The hydraulic press crushed it. It was the circle of life. As the truck pulled away, Steve hung off the back and gave me a salute. I returned it. I turned back to the house. I looked at the garage. I hit the button again. Whirr! The carpet retracted, a mechanism that worked 80% of the time, and thankfully worked now. The door lowered. The lights faded. The show was over. I looked across the street. Mrs. Higgins was gone. The blinds were closed. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sam. "Sam, you are a legend. Also, you owe me $50 for the CAD drawings. Me. Put it on my tab." I walked back inside. Sarah was standing in the hallway, shaking her head. "You're an idiot," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "I'm a homeowner," I corrected. But the war wasn't over. I knew Higgins. I knew the HOA. I had won the battle, but the bureaucracy would strike back. They would call an emergency meeting. They would try to rewrite the bylaws. And I was ready. Because while I was reading the bylaws, I found something else in Article 12 regarding holiday decorations, specifically the lack of a maximum duration for festive lighting. But that was a plan for December. For now, I had a garage to maintain. The summons arrived 3 days later. It wasn't a pink slip this time. It was a cream-colored envelope, heavy stock, sealed with what looked like genuine despair. Notice of Emergency Board Meeting Agenda Item 1. Review of accessory structure policies regarding automation and textiles. Agenda Item 2. The garage at 402 Maple Drive. Textiles, I chuckled, tossing the letter onto the kitchen counter. She means the carpet. Sarah looked at the letter. You know she's going to try to ban it. She's going to rewrite the bylaws. She can try, I said, buttering a piece of toast with the confidence of a man who has read 412 pages of legal gibberish. But ex post facto laws are tricky, even for dictatorships like Oakhaven Estates. The meeting was held on a Tuesday night in the community center basement. The room smelled of floor wax and passive aggression. There were folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. At the front table sat the board. Mr. Henderson, the architect with the eye patch, Mrs. Gable, who was 90 and mostly asleep, and in the center, Mrs. Brenda Higgins. She looked tired. Her visor was pulled low. She looked like a general who had lost the beachhead. The room was packed. Usually HOA meetings are attended by 3 people, the board and the one guy complaining about a barking dog. Tonight, it was standing room only. Big Mike was there. Sparky was there. The Dave and Steve formed the sanitation crew were actually standing in the back, still wearing their neon vests. "Order," Higgins banged a tiny gavel. "We are here to discuss the situation at the Markson residence." She didn't look at me. She looked at a point on the wall just above my head. "The board proposes a new amendment," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Amendment 14 to B. No accessory structure shall utilize motorized entry systems, audio amplification devices, or decorative ground coverings extending beyond the footprint of the structure." A murmur went through the crowd. "Furthermore," she continued, "we move that the existing structure at 402 Maple Drive be deemed non-conforming and removed within 30 days. "Objection!" I stood up. I wasn't a lawyer, but I had watched enough Law and Order to know you have to stand up when you object. "Mr. Markson," Higgins sighed, "you may speak." I walked to the front of the room. I turned to face the crowd, then the board. "Members of the board," I began. "I was cited for a violation of Article 4, Section 2. I was told to conceal my refuse containers within a permanent structure. I did exactly that." "You made a mockery of the rules," Higgins snapped, losing her composure. "You built a dollhouse with a red carpet. It plays classical music at 7 in the morning." "Is there a decibel limit in the bylaws?" I asked. "Well, no, but is there a ban on motorized doors?" "It's implied." "Implicit rules are not enforceable, Brenda," I said softly. "But let's talk about value. Mr. Henderson, you're an architect." Henderson adjusted his glasses. "I am." "I utilized hardy plank siding, correct?" "You did," Henderson nodded. "Good stuff. Expensive." "I used architectural shingles. I poured a 3,000-pound PSI concrete slab with rebar reinforcement. I installed copper wiring in conduit. Mr. Henderson, in your professional opinion, is the structure built to code?" Henderson leaned back. A small smile played on his lips. "Mr. Markson, that structure is built better than my first apartment. It is, frankly, over-engineered to a degree that borders on mental illness. But it is sound, and aesthetically, it matches the primary residence perfectly." "Thank you," I said. "Now, Mrs. Higgins wants me to tear it down. If I tear it down, I will be forced to return to using the bush, which you cited, or I could buy a plastic beige prefab shed from Home Depot for $400. I let that hang in the air. Plastic, beige, prefab. The 3 scariest words in a luxury suburb. "I checked the bylaws," I continued. "Plastic sheds are allowed in the rear of the property, but since my driveway is in the front, I would have to wheel the bins through the grass, creating ruts, mud, disorder." The crowd gasped. "So the choice is yours," I said, spreading my arms. You can keep the custom-built, automated, high-end mini-garage that has become a delightful neighborhood quirks. Or you can have mud ruts and a plastic box. I sat down. Mrs. Higgins looked at Henderson. She looked at Mrs. Gable, who had woken up just long enough to ask, "Is there cake?" "I move to vote," Henderson said. "All in favor of Amendment 14B?" Higgins raised her hand. It was the only hand. "All opposed?" Henderson raised his hand. Mrs. Gable raised her hand. She might have been asking for cake, but it counted. The entire room raised their hands. "Motion fails," Henderson said, slamming the gavel. Higgins stared at the sea of hands. She looked at me. I didn't smirk. I didn't gloat. I just nodded. She stood up. She took off her visor. She placed it on the table. "I resign," she said quietly. She walked out of the room. The silence lasted for 3 seconds, followed by the sound of Big Mike cracking open a soda can, which sounded suspiciously like a beer. The victory was sweet, but the legacy was sweeter. In the months that followed, the Trash Mahal became a local landmark. People didn't just tolerate it, they celebrated it. The Google Street View car drove by specifically to capture it with the door open. I timed it. On Halloween, I dressed the tiny garage up as a monster mouth and put a fog machine inside. The kids loved it. At Christmas, I put a tiny wreath on the tiny door and programmed the speakers to play Carol of the Bells. But the best part was the routine. Every Tuesday morning, like clockwork, the ritual continued. I would wake up. I would put on my robe. I would grab my coffee. I would walk out, nod to the neighbors, and press the button. Whirr. Bum, 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 bum. Swish. The carpet would roll out. The cans would emerge. It was ridiculous. It was a waste of resources. It was petty. But one morning, about 6 months later, I was out there polishing the tiny brass handle on the tiny door with a rag. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. A car pulled up. It was a sedan I didn't recognize. The window rolled down. It was Mrs. Higgins. She hadn't been seen much since the resignation. She had taken up gardening in her backyard, away from the street. She looked at me. She looked at the tiny garage, gleaming in the sun. I tensed up. Was this it? The final confrontation? She lowered her sunglasses. She stared at the red velvet carpet, which was currently drying on the line after a wash. "You need to weed the bonsai, Mark," she said. "The boxwood on the left is looking a little shaggy." I looked at the plant. She was right. It had a rogue twig. "I'll get the shears, Brenda," I said. She nodded. A curt, single nod. A nod of respect from one detail-obsessed maniac to another. She rolled up the window and drove away. I smiled. I walked over to the tiny garage, grabbed the tiny shears I kept inside, and trimmed the bush. They fined me $150 for a handle. I spent $3,800, 40 hours of labor, and nearly caused a civil war to prove a point. And as the garage door closed with a satisfying, expensive-sounding thud, I knew one thing for certain. It was worth every penny.